Communications from the House.
Engrossed House Bill 201, supplemental appropriation expiring funds from the aforesaid accounts to the unappropriated surplus balance of the State Fund General Revenue.
The message will be received to Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration, committee reference be dispensed with, and the bill be read a first time.
Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. The clerk will read the bill a first time.
Engrossed House Bill 201, supplemental appropriation expiring funds from the aforesaid accounts to the unappropriated surplus balance of the State Fund General Revenue.
Bill be advanced. Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the constitutional rule requiring a bill be read on 3 separate days be suspended, and that the bill be read a second and third time and placed upon its adoption.
The Senator from Jackson moves that the constitutional rule requiring bills to be read on 3 different days be suspended, and that the bill be read a second and a third time be placed upon its passage. All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. The clerk prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk close the machine. Ascertain the results on this question. 32 yeas, 0 nays, 2 absent, not voting. More than 4/5 of the members present and voting having voted the affirmative, and declare the constitutional rules suspended. The clerk will read the bill a second time.
Engrossed House Bill 201. Second reading of the bill, supplemental appropriation expiring funds from the aforesaid accounts to the unappropriated surplus balance of the State Fund General Revenue.
Are there amendments to the bill?
There are not any.
If not, the bill be engrossed and advanced to third reading. The clerk will read the bill a third time.
Engrossed House Bill 201, third reading of the bill. Supplemental appropriation expiring funds from the aforesaid accounts to the unappropriated surplus balance of the State Fund General Revenue.
Questions on passage of the bill? The Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a brief explanation of the bill. Senate Bill 2001, House Bill 201 is a supplemental appropriation from unappropriated surplus balance of general revenue to the Governor's Civil Contingent Fund. Before the passage of this supplemental appropriation, the unappropriated surplus balance of general revenue is approximately $9 million. This supplemental appropriation includes the expiration of an additional $13.7 million from lottery funds and $7.3 million from excess lottery funds. Additionally, it includes the expiration of $55 million from the Rainy Day Fund for a total amount of $76 million to be expired to the unappropriated surplus balance of general revenue of $9 million. From there, this supplemental appropriates from the new balance of unappropriated surplus general revenue $85 million to the Governor's Office Civil Contingent Fund to be used as the FEMA required match of 25% of state funds for a total estimated cost of damages from the June 2016 flooding of over $330 million, and I urge passage.
Questions on passage of the bill as a discussion. The senior senator from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd be remiss if I didn't make some comments about what took place in the month of June, especially amongst a ton of my constituents who were affected by this disaster. First, I do want to point out that had it not been for the first responders in West Virginia, we'd have seen a death toll so much higher. There were 23 lives that were taken from this flood, 6 in Kanawha County. We saw the National Guard, who came and set up posts, was there going into homes. From a location that I worked at, 10 days after the flood, we had an individual show up who had not been out of their home and had been merely surviving on eating cat food, and came down and had not had any type of meal and had a special needs child. We've had families completely torn apart from this disaster. There was one family I talked to, and the mother was crying, pointing at her young child and saying, "You see the walker, the little toy that she's in? That's the only toy that child has left." A lot of people ask, why don't they go live elsewhere with their families? Well, Mr. President, in West Virginia, your family is your neighbor. A lot of times they'd say, "We live here. My mom lives right there. My sisters and brothers live right there." The situation was horrific. Mr. President, I thought I knew what a natural disaster was. I thought I understood it. But it wasn't until I saw the devastation that was left behind for these individuals that I truly got to experience what it was. My county and my constituents are so thankful for all the volunteers that came out to help. We had countless numbers of them. We had people come from all across the United States and from even other places in the world. We had one lady drive down and say, "I'm not from West Virginia, but I want to help. And I had to catch rides all the way to get to your state." And she found someone to live with, lived in a shelter, just so she could help individuals by cleaning out their homes. The outpouring of aid from all types of organizations and individuals was nothing like I'd ever seen before. We also did receive some help from FEMA, but Mr. President, I don't share the praise for FEMA that a lot of people have. 7,000 individuals applied for FEMA aid in West Virginia. 2,500 homes were destroyed. And Mr. President, the cap was $33,000 of what individuals could receive. And the number I was given was only 188 people received that $33,000 cap. We can spend billions of dollars overseas, but when it comes to being there for our own people, the federal government being there for our own people, they fell short. We still have people living in tents in Kanawha County, all across our state, put out of their home. Mr. President, I don't have a lot of praise for the situation that happened from our federal government. I really think that we should have done more for our citizens who pay taxes, who put in for those programs, and who allow those organizations to exist. As you all know, that Herbert Hoover High School and Clendenin Elementary School, those kids were displaced. We are not going to receive portables to help those schools until February. We have kids that are doing only half days of education. Our middle schoolers are there for half a day and then leave, trying to jam everything they can into a short period. Our high schoolers, the same situation. And yet we have to wait until February because of red tape in order to get enough classrooms to adequately educate our students. That is no fault of the teachers and no fault of the students. That is a failure of planning from the federal government, who've been through these situations multiple times. I'll tell you, our citizens are strong. Our communities are strong. And our appetite for success in West Virginia is there. We're going to come out of this. We are going to recover because West Virginians are strong. We are going to get better and we're going to help. But I will say, in replacing the schools, we have to make sure that the elementary school remains in Clendenin and that Herbert Hoover High School remains in the same community area as well. Because if we take those away from a community who's already suffered so much from a natural disaster, then there's very bleak hope of economic recovery for those areas. I feel so horrible for all the people that went through this situation. And I'm glad that we have this amount of money that we are putting up to try to help them. And I'm so glad the state's finally getting involved. But Mr. President, this is not going to be enough. We all have to do more. We have to roll up our sleeves and do everything we can for the people that were affected by this disaster statewide. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sir, further discussion. Senator from Greenbrier.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I stand to congratulate the Governor of West Virginia to have the foresight to take this action in a special session to help us as a state to struggle with this major blow to our communities and the loss of schools and the loss of businesses, the loss of homes, and very, very importantly, in the loss of lives. I live in one of the hardest hit areas in the state, and I can tell you that this has been a real challenge and a real change for our region. Student recreation areas are gone. Where we had football fields and soccer fields and tennis courts, they're gone. Business which depends upon the tourism industry, is down many times 40–50% in our area. Housing is desperate. We still have people living with relatives. We have people who are living in tents. We have people who are living in campers. The future and what we do is important to us, with what we do today with this and what we do tomorrow. I tell you, our response in our region was tremendous. We had a great response from all over the state. Many of you called me and wanted to know what you could do. The senator from Berkeley came, and I didn't think I'd ever get rid of him all summer. He lived in my house all summer as he worked down there in flood areas in Richwood and Rupert and Rainelle and White Sulphur and Caldwell as he worked in those places. He became part of our family. The dog likes him better than he does me now as he stayed with us. FEMA, and I don't understand the reaction here, but I can tell you that FEMA was tremendous in our area. They moved in, they put themselves in action and work, they visited, they set up and saw nearly every person you could imagine. They were out in places that you could not even think that there were disasters. They were there. So there were some problems, I will say that, but there were good things that took place with what I saw from FEMA. The National Guard, what can you say about them? These guys came and spent time, and they're still spending time in Greenbrier County, in Fayette County, and in Summers and Monroe counties. Tremendous, tremendous action. We have a lot of work to do. And I appreciate the fact that this is the start in that direction. As a state, we have to start thinking about the future of business in our small communities. I think the senator made a good point when he said we have to think about not losing our communities. It's devastating to a small town if you lose 3 families in that town. Some families lost not just by moving, they lost because of death in our communities. It's very, very destructive to the future of small, struggling communities. And we as a body are taking the right step in doing this. There's so much more that we can do. And I continue to encourage us to do that. And I thank all of you who were part of that. As I said, as I received phone calls and as I received offer of help and things you could do. I appreciate the governor and the work that he's done and what he did. He visited our area. I would have cost him every time he'd come with another project here and another project there, and I think he'd want to run when he'd see me. But he was so responsive to the people in our area, and I appreciate that very much. So this is a good piece of legislation. It's important that we pass this. It's important that we move forward as a state. We will in Greenbrier County. We will in Fayette County. We will in Summers County. And we will in Monroe County. Thank you.
Further remarks? Further remarks? The senator from Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very, I would agree with my fellow senator from Greenbrier as well as from Kanawha. This is a very important piece of legislation. I was standing on the banks of the Cherry River that afternoon, helpless, because we knew that people were being flooded in downtown Richwood, couldn't get out, and people were being evacuated. But because of the waters on that particular day, Richwood felt isolated. Richwood was one of those communities that, if you walk through that town today, is essentially a ghost town, struggling. There were many people that responded, and I give those volunteers who came and responded and showed up, walked through the streets. Many of them came with their shirt sleeves rolled up, like our senator from Berkeley, who was there not as a senator, but he was there serving, taking care of people. And I just appreciate the camaraderie and the fellowship that occurred during these events. As West Virginians, we're tough. We do have great resolve. We don't let things get us down. When we see a challenge, we step to the need. And during the course of those few weeks after June 23, we saw the best in West Virginians come together. This is an important piece of legislation that allows our communities to begin to rebuild. Richwood, for instance, lost their sewer system. The interceptor sewer that for weeks had over 1 million gallons of wastewater being discharged out of their treatment facility every day, a facility that normally handles about 250 to 300,000 gallons a day. Why? Because the sewers were damaged severely during the flooding, and they were taking water. That's just only one community. You can go looking at others as well. When you look at Camden on Golly, you look at Webster Springs, you look at Clendenin. You know, these are all communities that their infrastructure was damaged severely. This piece of legislation will allow us to help rebuild and capture those FEMA dollars necessary to allow us to come out with a brighter day in the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion. Senator from Boone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Majority Leader yield, please? Thank you. There was question of whether we could get a 75-25 match versus a 90-10 match, which obviously would be a better situation for us. Do we know how close we came to that, or what? Because I know there were several people, I'm sure, in this room that would purchase flood supplies and send them down to the flood-ravaged areas. Do we know where we are on that particular issue?
We are actively pursuing the 90%, so that you know. And that, let me just share this comment with you. On Governor Tomlin sent a request to President Obama for West Virginia to be included in a congressional disaster relief funding package. This request is for $310 million, which would be available through community development block grants for areas including housing, economic development, and infrastructure support, and so forth. Let's see. If approved, these grants would support West Virginia's recovery efforts at a level above and beyond FEMA funding. To be funded, the state would submit proposals for projects that are tied directly to long-term strategic plans currently under development for flood-impacted areas. And some of that answers your question, but if the state meets the FEMA-designated threshold of $253 million in disaster relief costs, FEMA would cover 90%, leaving the state responsible for 10%. There are ongoing efforts to tally these funding or the disaster dollars, and that can still be supplied at 90%, but this will take care of it as it stands currently, and we're continuing to try to reach those thresholds. I mean, we never hope for more damage, but to get 90% funding would be a great benefit, so we're continuing those efforts.
And again, the more we can document
yes.
that we've spent or donated to that area, the more apt we are to reach that.
Yes, the accounting and the documentation of this is vitally important. Yes.
Thank you.
Good question. Yes.
Further discussion. The senator from Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the Senate Majority Leader continue to yield? So as I understand your explanation, the $310 million grant money are additional funds separate and apart from the FEMA request we're appropriating money to match today, but a separate long-term recovery grant program that they're hopeful that Congress will pass and the President will approve. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Those bills are in Congress being discussed at the moment.
So the money that we're putting in here today, the $85 million, is the 25% match. And once, from listening to the Governor's comments of driving down the road here this morning, he seemed to be very confident that we would hit the $253 million threshold to make us eligible for the 10%, assuming, again, the President approves that request. Is that your understanding?
That's exactly
well?
right, yes.
And assuming we do appropriate the $55 million out of rainy day fund, which includes another $9 million from the surplus fund from last year that kicks back into that, and that's based on 25%, that if in fact that we do meet the 10% match, the President approves the 10% match, is it anticipated that that money in the rainy day fund or in the contingent fund sitting in excess that isn't necessary for flood relief would then be kicked out of the contingency fund back to the rainy day fund, or it would just sit permanently or for some period of time in the Governor's contingent fund? Because there could be a significant amount of money, $30 or $40 million.
As I understand it, the money, the difference between the 25% and the 10% could come back to the rainy day or civil contingency fund and then be allocated to the rainy day fund. But I don't think that there's any specific tie to that fund as those monies come back from the federal government.
So the way we leave it here today, it'll sit in that civil contingent fund if it's unappropriated for flood relief, and then it will be up to a future governor and or legislature to decide what to do with.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Just briefly, I too rise in support of it. I am mindful of the fact, and I do appreciate the work of this body and the difficulty decisions we made during the special budget session in order to balance our budget without taking the entire shortfall from the rainy day fund, because obviously while it is a revenue shortfall fund, it is also a rainy day fund to solve real human tragedies and human and natural disasters similar to what we've just seen here in June. So I do applaud the work of this body in taking a more measured approach, and also the work of the governor, so that the rainy day fund was in a much more solvent position at the time that we have to tap into it now for a real flood relief to help the people of our communities, our counties, and our state. So again, I applaud the work of this body and the governor and our colleagues across the aisle ultimately in coming to that same conclusion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion. Senator from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd be remiss if I didn't call attention to the involvement of Governor Tomlin. I was very, very pleased to see his reaction to this. He's been very involved since day one. But also, I don't want the public to misunderstand that the devastation is over. We clearly, our action here is a step, a financial step along the way to do West Virginia's part. And certainly there are dozens of people out of their homes, families still lost family members that are still dealing with that and will forever. But as I came down last night to session, I heard about the damage and the loss of the road into the shopping center at Elkview, and I glanced back across my right shoulder, and it's just empty. The entire shopping center, hotels, and it's all empty. You can't get to it for the loss of the road, a very large culvert wash. It's still out today. So I didn't want the public at large to get the idea that it's all over and everything's fixed. We understand it's not. This is just a step along our way to make sure that the funds are there to help those that are still very, very much in need. And our hearts and minds and of everyone in the legislature is still with you as you go along this path of destruction. And I do want to end by thanking Governor Tomlin again for his personal, in-depth involvement in this tragedy. My hat's off to him for that.
Further discussion? Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I ask unanimous consent that the comments by the gentleman from Greenbrier, the senior senator from the 8th, the gentleman from Kanawha, gentleman from Nicholas, gentleman from Marshall, and the gentleman from Jefferson be printed in the appendix of the adjournment.
The senator from Jackson requests unanimous consent that the remarks by the senior senator from the 8th, the senator from Greenbrier, Nicholas, Marshall, and Jefferson be published in the appendix of the journal. Is there objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Question for the Senate, shall the bill pass? All those in favor will vote yea. Those opposed will vote nay. Clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the results on this question. 32 yeas, 0 nays. 2 absent not voting. More than a majority of those elected to the Senate having voted in the affirmative declare the bill passed. Senator from Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the bill be made effective for passage and request unanimous consent that the roll call used on passage be used to make it so effective.
Senator from Jackson moves the bill be made effective from passage. Request unanimous consent that the roll call used on passage of the bill be used to make it so effective. Is there objection? Chair hears none on this question. 32 yeas, 0 nays, 2 absent not voting. More than 2/3 of those elected to the Senate having voted in the affirmative declare the bill effective from passage. Clerk will communicate the action of the Senate to the House.